On Christmas Eve 2002, a young woman and her unborn son were taken from the world, and the man who should have protected her was the one who betrayed her. Laci Peterson, 8 months pregnant with a son, Connor, was full of life, joy and hope for the future. But as the world celebrated Christmas, Scott Peterson was preparing for something unimaginable. Later that day, Laci would disappear, leaving only questions and a trail of lies behind. Scott claimed Laci had gone out for a walk, but there was no sign of her. With no clues, police began their search, but it was Scott's behavior that raised red flags. It wasn't until investigators uncovered a shocking secret: Scott was having an affair. With his affair exposed, Scott became the prime suspect. Then, 4 months later, the Bay revealed its terrible secret. Alongside Laci, they discovered the body of their unborn son, Connor. The case was splashed across every media outlet, and the trial was a spectacle. The world watched, riveted by every detail. During the trial, forensic experts testified about the state of Laci and Connor's bodies, details that shocked the nation. Public outrage grew as more details emerged, with many wondering how Scott could commit such a heinous crime. Meanwhile, Scott's demeanor in court was cold and detached, often staring blankly at the proceedings. As the trial came to a close, the jury began deliberating, each member grappling with the gravity of the decision before them. After days of deliberation, the jury finally reached a verdict, and Scott Peterson's fate was sealed. Scott Peterson was convicted of 2 murders, the death of Laci and their unborn son Connor, and sentenced to death. The public reaction was swift. Some called it justice, while others still questioned Scott's conviction. Scott Peterson was taken to San Quentin prison, where he would spend the rest of his life on death row. The case would continue to captivate the media and the public years after the conviction, leaving many still questioning Scott Peterson's true motives. To this day, the murder of Laci Peterson and the conviction of her husband remains one of the most notorious and controversial cases in modern American history. Even after Scott's conviction, questions lingered. Was justice truly served, or had an innocent man been wrongly convicted? In the years that followed, Scott Peterson appealed his conviction, hoping for a chance at freedom. While Scott's legal battle continued, the media circus around his case showed no signs of slowing down. Laci Peterson's story, though tragic, became a symbol for many, reminding the world of the horrors of domestic violence. Throughout it all, the case raised important questions about the flaws in the legal system and the complexities of justice. The debate over Scott Peterson's guilt continues to this day, with some believing that his conviction was a miscarriage of justice. As Scott Peterson remains on death row, the future of his case remains uncertain. Will Scott Peterson's conviction be overturned, or will it stand as a grim reminder of the consequences of his actions? Regardless of the outcome, the story of Laci Peterson is one that has touched the hearts of millions and will never be forgotten. Laci's life may have been tragically cut short, but her story is a reminder of the strength of love, justice, and the human spirit. Years after the conviction, Laci's story lives on in the public's memory, fueling ongoing discussions about justice. Documentaries, books, and media specials have kept the case alive, providing a platform for both sides of the debate. The media's portrayal of Scott Peterson became as controversial as the case itself, shaping public perception. Through it all, Laci's family fought for justice, never losing their resolve to honor her memory. Laci Peterson's tragic death sparked increased awareness about domestic violence, leading to changes in law enforcement protocols. Despite the conviction, Scott Peterson's legal team continues to fight for a new trial, claiming that new evidence could exonerate him. While on death row, Scott's case reignited debates over the death penalty and the fairness of his trial. Despite the controversy, Laci's family has continued to stand strong in their fight for justice, refusing to forget her legacy. Laci's story is more than a crime. It is a reminder of the fragility of life, the power of love, and the importance of seeking justice. Though justice was served, the unanswered questions of why Scott Peterson did it and how he lived with himself remain. As the years passed, the legal landscape changed, and Scott's case became a symbol for those calling for reform. Laci's family, despite the years of grief, continue to fight for the memory of their loved ones, Laci and Connor. Public opinion remained divided, with many still questioning Scott Peterson's guilt or innocence. Some new perspectives began to emerge, questioning the fairness of the trial and the role of media coverage. Throughout the ongoing debates, Scott Peterson remained silent, offering little insight into his actions. Despite everything, the biggest question remains: why did Scott Peterson do it? The media's sensationalized portrayal of Scott Peterson turned him into one of the most infamous men in America. Legal experts continue to analyze Scott's case, examining whether justice was served or whether the trial was flawed. Laci's legacy, however, transcends her tragic death, sparking greater awareness of domestic violence and its devastating effects. The future of Scott Peterson's case remains uncertain, with some hoping for a new trial, while others believe justice was already served. Even years later, the media continues to revisit the case, adding fuel to the fire of public fascination and debate. Years later, the public still remains invested in the case, with many forming strong opinions on both sides. The legal battle drags on, with Scott Peterson's defense team pushing for a retrial, citing new evidence and appeals. Throughout the legal proceedings, Laci's family has provided emotional testimony, sharing their pain and their commitment to seeing justice served. Scott Peterson, even as his legal team fights for his freedom, continues to maintain his silence, offering no answers for his actions. The case continues to raise questions about the fairness of the legal system, with many questioning whether Scott Peterson received a fair trial. The Peterson case had a lasting impact on the legal community, prompting reforms in criminal trials and domestic violence investigations. While many have turned against him, Scott Peterson still has a small group of supporters who believe in his innocence. The public remains divided, with some advocating for justice for Laci and others arguing for Scott's exoneration. As the years go on, the questions surrounding Scott Peterson's guilt and Laci's death remain unanswered. But one thing is certain: the world will never forget her story. The toll on Laci's family continues, with each new appeal or media update reopening old wounds. While Laci's family fought for justice, Scott Peterson's family faced public scrutiny and personal anguish. The case has never truly left the court of public opinion, with media outlets constantly revisiting the trial, fueling debate. Laci's death has become a pivotal case in discussions about domestic violence and justice, influencing how law enforcement investigates similar crimes. As the years pass, America remains divided on Scott Peterson's guilt or innocence, debates raging on social media and in courtrooms. While Scott Peterson remains on death row, his future remains uncertain, with some pushing for his release and others fighting for his sentence to remain. Despite the passing of time, the public continues to be fascinated by Scott Peterson, and his story remains a topic of discussion in true crime circles. The media narrative around Scott Peterson has shifted over time, with some outlets focusing on the potential flaws in the trial, while others continue to focus on his conviction. Laci Peterson's legacy continues to influence the way we think about domestic violence, justice, and the lives affected by it. While Scott Peterson's case may not be over, the world will always remember Laci Peterson, a woman whose life was cut short but whose story will never fade. As Scott Peterson's case lingers in the courts, the dynamics of the legal proceedings continue to evolve, with new challenges to his conviction. The media's coverage of Scott Peterson's case continues to shape public perception, with each new twist in the story becoming a headline. Public opinion continues to shift, with some believing Scott Peterson may have been wrongfully convicted while others remain firm in their belief of his guilt. For Laci's family, each new development brings both hope and heartbreak as they fight to keep her memory alive while seeking justice. Years on death row have left Scott Peterson isolated, with little to show for his efforts to regain his freedom. Laci's tragic death became a catalyst for increased awareness and action in domestic violence prevention. With the rise of social media, the case has taken on new life, with people around the world discussing, debating, and dissecting every detail. Despite Scott Peterson's continued legal struggles, many believe that the flaws in the original trial can still be addressed. For the public, Laci's story remains a haunting reminder of the fragility of life, the complexity of justice, and the power of the media. As the years pass, the memory of Laci Peterson remains etched in the hearts of many, a symbol of love, loss, and the fight for justice. Scott Peterson's defense team continues to push for a new trial, claiming that significant legal errors were made during the original proceedings. The case has become a media spectacle, with news outlets continuing to revisit the trial, fueling both support and skepticism. With the introduction of new evidence, the public's opinion becomes even more polarized, with some demanding justice for Laci and others calling for Scott's exoneration. Laci Peterson's death has led to significant changes in domestic violence law, with reforms to how police handle similar cases. Years in prison have left Scott Peterson isolated as he continues to maintain his innocence, but struggles with the reality of his situation. Across America, Scott Peterson remains a divisive figure, with some calling for his release and others believing he belongs behind bars. Despite the years, Laci's family remains steadfast in their pursuit of justice, never giving up on their daughter and grandson's memory. Legal scholars continue to analyze Scott Peterson's case, exploring whether the legal system failed to deliver true justice. Recently, new public documents have been released, providing more insight into the investigation and Scott Peterson's behavior before and after the crime. Despite the controversy, one thing remains clear: Laci Peterson's life and death have left an indelible mark on the world. Years after the conviction, new motions are filed to reopen the case, reigniting the debate over Scott Peterson's guilt. Public outcry grows as new evidence begins to surface, with some believing Scott deserves a second chance, while others remain convinced of his guilt. Scott Peterson, now years into his sentence, reflects on his life, his future, and the consequences of his actions. Newly uncovered evidence is presented, casting doubt on some of the original claims made during the trial. Scott's legal team pushes for a retrial, arguing that the new evidence is significant enough to overturn his conviction. The media continues to fuel the fire, sensationalizing every new development and creating a constant cycle of speculation and debate. Laci's family, exhausted from years of legal battles, fights to keep their focus on honoring her memory, despite the ongoing turmoil. As new evidence is presented and the case evolves, the public's opinion continues to shift, with some now believing Scott may be innocent. Scott Peterson's future remains uncertain, with many questions still unanswered about what happened that fateful night. Despite the passage of time, the question remains: what was the true motive behind Laci Peterson's murder, and why did it happen? After years of legal battles, Scott Peterson's final appeal is rejected, and his conviction stands. With the appeals exhausted, the legal battle comes to an end, but for many, the fight for justice will never stop. Though the case has ended in the courts, the public's interest in Laci Peterson's story remains unshaken, a reminder of the power of justice and the importance of never forgetting the victims. Laci Peterson's memory endures, not as a victim, but as a symbol of love, strength, and the fight for justice. The questions may never be fully answered, but one thing remains certain: Laci Peterson will never be forgotten. And so, as time passes, the story of Laci Peterson and the life taken too soon leaves an indelible mark on the world.